Welcome to another broadcast of The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. All past shows are available as podcasts. You can find them at ArtistFirst.com. We welcome your questions by email to dj@ArtistFirst.com. Here they are, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
And thank you very much, Z-Man. And yes, we don't want any questions then other than by email.
Oh, okay.
You shall not question the program.
Oh, my.
The program is sound.
All righty. And I'm Margaret.
And I'm Michael. And happy spring, almost.
It's coming up.
Coming up in just about a week. And tonight we're going to talk about an interesting topic. I think Margaret came up with. Margaret, in case you folks don't know, has incredibly deep insights into things, like on a constant basis. And she writes them down. And then, occasionally I'll say, well, what should we talk about tonight? And she drags out her notebook and she just, opens the page to one pithy thing after another and just said, well, let's talk about this. And I thought this is going to be a great topic. So we had to go run out and find a quote, which we did find. And maybe we should just begin with the quote, and then we'll just drop right into the infinite.
Sure.
So do you want to do the quote? Because this is a quote by the origin of the quote rather is Jan Martel.
Yes.
Who is the author, in case you guys don't know, of The Life of Pi? Because I didn't know. We looked him up.
Okay. The individual soul touches upon the world soul, like a well reaches for the water table. That which sustains the universe beyond thought and language, and that which is at the core of us and struggles for expression, is the same thing. The finite within the infinite within the finite.
And your insight was really along those same lines. That, but what we wrote on the website, or will be posted on the website, is really that the confrontation, that existence here is the confrontation between those two, between the infinite being embodied in the finite, and the finite struggling, in essence, to cope with or to understand the infinite.
Right. Right. The fact that human existence is a series of confrontations between the finite, being us, and the infinite, which is the things that we can't control.
And you also said the things we can't understand and the things we can't do.
Right. That is that which is outside the bounds of who we are. And it's where that, like when we talk about it, your world being a bubble, it's at the boundary of that bubble where those confrontations happen, where the finite and the infinite touch. And then there's where we begin to struggle with any number of things. My goodness, if you distill down all your conflicts that you've had to endure, you look at it and realize it's between me and that which is greater than me. And I don't like it.
I mean, one that people are probably thinking of, I was thinking of, was, when you struggle to the end of your life. The end of life is something people don't want to think about, generally speaking. If they do, they feel overwhelmed by it, because it is the end of our temporal existence, perhaps, but also just trying to struggle against it. People spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars advertising, longevity and advertising this drug or this vitamin or that vitamin or this cream or that cream, all designed in some way to stave off that confrontation with the infinite, which is, the Grim Reaper, if you will, and just, all the mythos that has been developed and evolved around, the encapsulating of what is existence, what is death, and where do we go, what happens after, and if you haven't come to peace with it and try to understand that you may never understand fully. In fact, you have to come to the peace with that you can't understand fully. But we have a thirst for it, a thirst to try and understand it, like the all that stuff that goes on with the NDEs. People bring back these snippets of an existence after what we would consider the end of temporal existence. And people are hungry for it because they want to understand it, but they're also afraid of it because they know they really can't understand it.
And it's an ongoing human experience. It's just different levels and different forms. And when you think of it, this ties every human soul to another human soul. Because this struggle is basic, being born down here in this world. You will struggle with your limitations and the limitations of the greater group, and that which cannot be controlled. And it's the same reaction. That's what I found fascinating. It's like we all don't like it. And you want to try to establish some kind of control. And I always go back to why. Why is that reaction there? And again, it goes back to fear. And that's also a basic thing. Your response to that which you cannot control automatically is fear. But can you take the fear out of that? Can you choose in that moment to be conscious enough to say, no fear? Because I'm basing this, where that fear is coming from is your basic body human self. You've fallen back down to your basic human 3D cell kind of existence. If you expand your consciousness at that point, and that's really where our struggle is. This is where the suffering is. And this is where your struggle is, to alleviate the suffering. To be able to bring your consciousness to a more broad viewpoint so that fear is not dominating your consciousness.
Fear of this particular fear of the struggle. But I'm reminded immediately, of course, of Buddha's revelation: all life is suffering. And I think within that is actually the unsaid, which is all life is suffering, and so don't worry about it, don't fear it. It is what it is. I know people say all life is suffering, and as though we should do something about it. And even the struggle to do something about it is in of itself doomed to failure, and will cause suffering in the person who says, "Well, I spent my whole life trying to feed the homeless," and that's good. If we stopped right there, I spent my whole life trying to feed the homeless, and I'm happy now, because although I was able to do what I could. No, and still there are homeless, still there are the poor, still the regret comes in, the I couldn't fix it comes in, the oh, if only I had if only the whole world were this way, only the whole world were that way comes in.
Yeah, it's again, you want the finite at that point to have infinite power.
Right, and you want to, because your intentions are good, you want somehow to to be given the Godhead, given the power to make it all right because I know how to do it. And it's the slippery slope towards even more suffering.
Mm-hmm. No, that path leads to more suffering. It's just because you are working from a center point of I, which is your ego, which is your human body, instead of sitting back and realizing, well, where do we all interconnect one to the other?
Right.
And it is in the infinite. It is something that you need to open your tight little fist up and let go, grasping at what I know. I know.
Right.
I've got to know more so I can do more. And it's like, okay, can you mellow? Just a bit. Take a breath. Just breathe.
Well, and if we go back to Jan Martel's quote, this world soul touching upon the well, the Buddha's statement, all life is suffering, is another way of saying the exact same thing. My individual life has suffering. And if you stop there, you go, oh, I'm terrible, I'm awful, I must deserve this. Everyone else is wonderful, I'm horrible, and this is what you hear from people, that it's all against me, I'm against everyone else, the world is against me, blah, blah, blah. All these stories of the ego. Mm-hmm. But if you go one step deeper, you say all life is suffering. Therefore, we are all connected. We are all suffering, whether it's at this exact moment, no. But if you say to yourself, all life is suffering, so the purpose of life is not to alleviate suffering. The purpose of life is to realize that we are all connected here, and that the common dream, the common dream, your path through it will include suffering, guaranteed. Your path, therefore, is not to avoid suffering. Your path is to say, what needs be done now, in the moment. What needs to be done now in the moment doesn't matter if it's causing me suffering or if there's suffering involved. It's me on the moment of now. And then the next moment comes. If you stop with, I'm suffering, therefore I must be bad, I must be this, you stay within the 3D little human I bubble where it's all about me and nothing else matters, and I'm just me against the world. You've heard that phrase.
Mm-hmm. And the interesting part about it is me against the world in my own mind.
Well, now, yeah.
Well, just, it's me against the world in my own mind.
There's your nihilists right there. There's your Nietzsche's.
And it's allowing yourself to realize that really I don't know everything. And most people say, oh yeah, I really don't, but they operate as if they do know everything. They haven't made space for what they don't know. And that sounds kind of absurd when you hear that phrase. What do you mean, make space for what I don't know? But it has to do with the ability to allow your consciousness to observe, and only observe, not your mental part to reach out and grasp with mental fingers this concept and turn it around and play with it and try to examine it and analyze it every which way you can. And
name it and all the things, yeah.
Well, just, to the point where you some people I know, they take out a mental microscope and put it under there and examine it down to the micronic level. Right. It's like, okay, I understand that's your specialty, but can you see the larger picture of this? Can you breathe and let it go for a second and see where it fits? Because there's a place where that must go in the larger picture. And it could be that you are too myopic to be able to see the broader picture. Can you make space for that thought? Because the response is usually, no, if I examine it enough, I'll be able to get it.
Right. That's exactly the response. You say to them, you have to make space for what you don't know, and what they hear is, you don't know enough, so you have to know more. And if I only read yet another book, or another 50 books, or another 1,000 books, or study it yet, at 100x, at 1,000x, at micrometer, at an electron microscope speed, or whatever, that somehow I'll figure it out. And let me just back up. As both of us have a great deal of training in the sciences, that is a path to knowledge, but it is not a path to wisdom. It is a path to knowledge, and knowledge is wonderful. It does give us wonderful powers.
I'm not knocking knowledge at all.
No, but to the key component of science is that you say, I don't know, and I don't know far more. Just the other day, we watched that the mathematician who was giving us the equation of everything, and then he said, this defines this incredibly small portion of the universe that we've observed. Beyond it, we have no idea what the actual universe is made of. So that's a wonderful admission, and you have to grok that. Oh, there's a word. You have to let that kind of soak into you and say that everything we know can be distilled down to something you can write on a page. Wonderful, beautiful. It no more describes the entirety of this existence than a child sitting there with a bucket of water saying, I know all about the ocean.
No, and what I respect is the fact that he basically said it to a very large public audience. Like, yes, this is the scientific method. You are supposed to have contrary viewpoints, but you must back it up with something.
Well, and I think your insight is even better. You have to allow space for that. Not only all the viewpoints, but the biggest one is the I don't know viewpoint. the everything we're arguing about is only an infinitesimal amount of knowledge based on the incredibly small amount of time that we've spent observing something which is beyond all. This is in the physical, beyond all concept of vastness in the physical alone. And if you just sit there and say, well, I know all about the ocean because I've got this, this thimble full of seawater in my hand, that's even more than we really know about the universe. We don't have a thimble full of seawater in our hands. You know, we don't even have that. We have about, let's be generous, maybe sum up all of human existence. Let's say it's 2 million years of technology under our fingertips right now. Against what we know of the life of the universe, it is not even a single tick on the smallest hand of the smallest clock you can find compared to the universe's existence and its vastness. And yet, yes, we've discerned some amazing things from incredibly small amounts of knowledge. Well, that's great, but we gotta leave ourselves space to say, maybe we don't know everything. Maybe, just maybe.
It's just when a person has made space in their thinking for the fact that there's so much more out there to learn, it's immediately perceivable because the ease by which they can talk about their theories and their work and being criticized by it doesn't perturb them in any way.
Because they're lacking any ego investment in them.
Right.
There's no identity with it. It's perfectly good. You criticize my theories all you want. It doesn't hurt me because I'm criticizing my theories all I want too.
Mm-hmm.
The ego being removed means that you're free.
Mm-hmm. There's no, how dare you question me about such and such.
I am science.
I am the supreme expert in this field kind of thing. And you're just like...
more degrees than a thermometer or whatever it is.
Right. And it just means to me that you've ossified your thinking. There's no flexibility in being able to adapt, which is basically what you need.
That rigidity that you're talking about, that non-flexibility. If you have that here in this confrontation between the finite and the infinite will destroy you. In other words, if your ego is against the infinite, your arms are too short to box with God. But you don't. If you realize in your heart that you don't have to, that God is not something you box with, God is something you bond with, that you realize you are just an infinitesimal piece of the all, and that the all is still connected to you. Oh wow, I can do anything I want now.
Well, being able to be flexible in observing the exact same thing. This is what we're talking about. It has to do with viewpoints and the angle on which you are approaching the same thing.
That's very good.
I believe it's a Chinese koan that basically you had 3 blind men.
No, the 3 blind men and the elephant
and
one?
The elephant.
Okay, I like that one.
And each blind man was put at a different part of the elephant. One was in the front with the head, one was on the side, and one was in the back. So, since they're blind, the only way they have to explore the elephant is by touching him and feeling the roughness of the skin and how big this living animal is. But when asked to describe the elephant, they all had different experiences. The one in the front was talking about, it has this long trunk that moves. And almost like a snake kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Then the one on the side is like, it's huge. It's like a wall. And you could feel the breathing. And then the one in the back is like, it's got the tail and the rump. It's like, no, I didn't feel anything long and like that. It was small, a little fuzzy on it. So each one of them was examining the exact same thing. But their experience with it, their interaction with it, was unique.
But the funny part is they all argue.
Yes, they were all arguing that they were right. I personally would have loved to hear the viewpoint of the elephant.
Stop feeling me up.
What is this?
What is this?
But, you just look at that and you're like, you realize that as human beings, that's how we function. That's how we actually operate. And then the discussion afterwards was, well, gee, this was my experience. It's like, no, you're wrong. Like, from your viewpoint.
But right there in what you just said, no, you're wrong, is an ego standpoint. And Tolle would say, you've invested in your perceptions of the elephant. Yes, first you're perceiving. Okay, wonderful. You're in the moment of perception. The elephant is this. Okay. The observation is egoless. But the ego comes in when you say, someone else says, well, it's this, and you immediately feel attacked, and you have to attack or defend, say, no, you're wrong. Nothing about the observation is disputed, but you're wrong about your conclusion. I am, and by implicit declaration, I am right. And therefore it's I versus you, and
well, my experience is more valid than yours.
Even better. Yes.
That's kind of, you sit there and you go, well, okay, you're all blind. Can we go there first? You're all blind.
And that's part of this. We're all blind. We're all just wells going down to the water table. We can't see it even. We only know that we're getting to something that nourishes us, or we're getting to an observation. A source. And then the all life is suffering lightning bolt of illumination is what you just said. We're all blind. If your observation is hey, we're all blind. So maybe we're all right and we're all wrong. We're all right in the sense that we felt something, that we perceived something. We can describe what we perceived. This is right. But our conclusions, because we're all blind, which is a great way of looking at humanity and all of us, we're all blind about all of this. We only see the tiniest bit. And so once you say that, all life is suffering, or we're all blind, you can say, oh, well, maybe I'll shut up and just listen.
This is where making space for what you don't know, even if you've had experience with it, making space for another individual's experience is something that a wise mind would take in. Just very simple. Just make space for the fact that that person's experience is going to be different. Frankly, if they took all three blind men and let them take turns in the front, all three would still be different.
Yes, but it's the revelation you just said there about making space for this, the observations is how you have to live. If you live your life with all life is suffering, you also can live your life with, the instant feeling of attack that I'm right and they're wrong. And then you say, well, wait a minute now. I am right and they are right from the different points of view. Einstein had this wonderful revelation of reference frames. Well, from one reference frame, the train is moving and you're sitting still. From another reference frame, it's the opposite. And yet, if you declared up and down that the train is not moving, you're right, despite the fact that the other person in the train could be just as right. And then if you looked from another frame of reference, neither one of you is right. That's the space that Einstein found in his theories, because he had that expansiveness. He was able to use that. It basically was a what did he call it? A mind journey. I forget. It was a better name for it in German, but it was this idea of a
mind experiment.
Mind experiment, but he had a better
thought experiment.
Thought experiment. It was something even better in German, but it doesn't matter. The point is that he didn't have to go anywhere or do any actual theorizing or rather
experimentation.
Physical experimentation. He could just play it out in his head and go, yeah, this guy here would see this, and this guy here would see this, but they're both right and they're both wrong. And then he could, he got to special relativity, basically, sitting on a train. But there's the expansiveness of somebody who started out with, I don't know.
Right.
And I have to make space for what I don't know.
And it's making space for the experience and the perceptions of others. Understanding that it all plays together in a manner that you need a very broad viewpoint to understand. Very, very broad. Outside both frames of reference.
Well, let's tell you what, let's go to another frame of reference, back to the studio, and then they can tell us how wrong we are.
The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed is the latest book from Michael Lyons, the award-winning author of There is a Reaper. Featuring 13 original stories, this wide-ranging collection has everything. Forbidden love, gods versus demigods, weird invading aliens, sexy seductive artificial intelligence, and unusual passion between the living and the dead. All set amidst fantastic worlds of pain and loss and boundless joy. From the sublime to the macabre to the bittersweet, The Fat Man Gets Out of Bed will leave you breathless with laughter, brimming with tears, trembling with suspense. Available now on Amazon.com, Google Play, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere.
There is a Reaper is the story of 5-year-old Christopher Aaron and his life-changing struggle with leukemia. Winner of both the Indie Bragg Medallion as well as the reader's favorite silver medal for memoir. There is a Reaper has more than 100 Amazon book reviews and a 5-star rating. It has been described as life-changing, spiritual, a must-read. Just released on Audible and iTunes, this memoir is also available in paperback and on Amazon Kindle for only 99 cents. Get your copy of this life-changing memoir today.
The wait is over. First Blood, Book 2 of the Blood series is out. Your favorite bad boy thief, Dev, is back, and the beautiful and deadly Trey is right there with him. She is sharp, sexy, and full of surprises. Their adventures continue as a new power arises to threaten the world. The heart of creation is under attack, and time is definitely not on their side as they battle against their enemies' undead hordes. Can they unlock the hidden power that can defeat him, or will his forces draw first blood? Get all 3 installments in the series. Book 0, It's in the Blood. Book 1, Destroyer's Blood, and the new release, Book 2, First Blood, today. Available in ebook and paperback format on Amazon, Kobo, Apple, and most other fine e-tailers.
Rick Riordan fans, love mythology with plenty of action and humor? Destroyer's Blood is for you. The new fantasy novel by award-winning author Michael Lynes is Book 1 of the adventures of Dev Kalian, the Blood series. Follow Dev and his magic sword betrayer as they are suddenly attacked and forced to return to Olympus to fight in a war they want no part in. The world of men and gods is about to be destroyed by Zeus's ancient foe, and only Dev and Trey can stop him. The conflict never stops, and the amazing twist will have you on the edge of your seat. Act now while the ebook is on sale for only 99 cents. Destroyer's Blood is available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, Kobo, and fine e-tailers everywhere. And while you're there, get the free prequel, It's in the Blood, available for a limited time.
Hi, this is Hannah Ruth from the band Wild Hum. Check out our new Americana Soul CD, Wild Hum, at our website, wildhummusic.com. And you are listening to the ArtistFirst Radio Network. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on The Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. Let's get right back to them. Michael and Margaret Lynes.
Thank you very much, Z-Man. And tonight, we're talking about the infinite. Aren't you glad you tuned in? Well, we are kind of talking about the infinite, but we're really talking about, I think the revelation to me so far of the show is making space for what you don't know. And maybe it's a little bit of a paraphrase of Jan Martel's quote, but I think it's in there too. I mean, he's a writer, so he had to put a lot of words there. But if you look at this, if you distill it down to a little bit less words, his struggles for expression, which he talks about here, is in essence because you don't know the words, you don't know how to describe that which is at the core of us. You have to make space for the fact that there are no words which can describe the infinite. There are no equations which can encompass the infinite. And that you, despite all that you have spent your maybe whole life trying to do it, are ultimately going to be a suffering failure. And you have to come to peace with that. You're not going to solve world hunger. You're not going to eliminate suffering. You're not going to find the equation which describes the whole universe. And you can try, but you have to come to peace with the fact that you're going to fail. Or even in success, quote unquote, there will be yet another thing. The universe is indescribable by design. We're not here to describe the universe. We're here to experience existence, to do what you said in your writing, which was that the infinite comes to the finite to experience limitation.
Right. That's the, it was a Jewish cone or conundrum. They basically said if God is omnipotent, which is all powerful,
Omniscient.
all-knowing, and omnipresent, which is he's everywhere at one time, what is the one thing that he lacks? And you sit there and you go, well, 3 descriptions seem to encompass everything.
Right. Maybe we could have the audience email in their answers. No?
And the response is limitation. He has no limits. So when you think of that, you're like, are we a reflection of God wanting to experience what limitations are like?
Yep.
So his life force, the life force of all that is of source, comes and creates that which he had no knowledge of.
Right.
Interesting. Very interesting.
And the way it's described, in Genesis is that God forms clay and then breathes the breath of life into it. Well, isn't that a beautifully poetic, evocative way of saying that which is infinite and invisible becomes incarnate in clay, in flesh, in matter, and experiences limitation. Experiences what's one of the first things Adam says is, I need a name, and I need to name all these things, and then I'm lonely. All these things are things that God doesn't experience, The man needs a companion. Well, God doesn't need any companions, but in limitation, you're lonely,
Well, what was interesting is that Adam at that point was a whole being.
That's true, too. Neither male nor female.
He was neither male nor female. And God had split him.
Right, they talk about a rib, but it's really more like a bifurcation, a 2 beings from one.
I think in the original Hebrew, it was closer to that, where it wasn't just the rib, it was like the whole side of Adam, so that he was split into male and female, so that they had companionship one to the other, and they had to learn how to interact with one to the other.
Right.
Which is, you sit there and you're like, if we are these finite beings, although I'm going to back up on that too, because we had a fall, and that's where it really became obvious that we were finite.
I think even before, I think the fall is a consequence of becoming part of the finite, because initially you are a limitation. We're given a paradisical existence, and we're instantly dissatisfied with it. Isn't that the human nature? Right there. Here's everything you could possibly need or want. We only got one rule. You got to take your shoes off before you go inside. And you break that rule, you're out. And immediately, because we're immediately dissatisfied, we have to put our shoes on and walk around. It's stupid. What I'm trying to say is the quest for suffering, to bring suffering into the world, is innate in human natures. We can't deal with paradisical existences. We have to suffer. We almost have to engender suffering, which is what the fall did. It said, now you're going to have to dig in the ground to get your food. You're going to labor. You're going to strike the snake. There was a whole lot of things, but it all was suffering in essence. Back into now the world, which isn't paradisical anymore, right?
I'd have to think about that more. I'm not sure I agree. Because at this point, you're looking at it realizing that limitation, which is who we are down here, is therefore a result of our own choices.
And maybe initially the choice of the infinite to become limited.
not sure I understand what you mean by that.
Well, your koan, your conundrum says, "What does God lack?" Well, right in that conundrum, if you ask me, if God says, "What do I lack?" It is an interesting thing for an infinite, omnipotent, omniscient being to not even know what it lacks. You know what I mean? The whole idea,
That's true.
right, of God postulating a question: "What do I lack?" You're infinite, omniscient. I lack limitations. I lack, in essence.
I lack nothing.
I lack suffering. I lack limitation. I lack the ability to be not God. You know?
So, let's put together an experience that says that you are limited in what you can do. You're not all-powerful. You're limited in what you can understand and have knowledge of. And you're limited in your being state. You're not omnipresent. You are limited to a soul existence within a lifetime.
Yeah.
You sit there and you go,
And herein we are, in essence, this is the infinite educating itself in something new, which is amazing in and of itself, but yet this is also a great argument for free will, because without the free will portion of this, the infinite is not yet allowing itself to turn upon itself. In essence, that's what free will allows you to do, that which is not controlled by source. Because if you're controlling it, if all you've done is separated a piece of yourself and saying, well, now you go off and live, but just, everything I do, you have to do. Everything I say, you have to say. It's just it's no more than a finger. A finger doesn't have an individual existence. But if your finger could rebel and say, exactly, imagine which finger could rebel. We need television. I just got flipped off here. Go ahead.
Well, if you just thinking of that, which basically makes it an interesting thought, because none of the rest of creation has that free will.
Right. Exactly.
And in order to have a real relationship, it must be a free will choice on both parties.
Right.
So, a whole different level of evolution experience for consciousness.
And in that free will embodiment, and in the ability to, you also have this ability to regret, to have this suffering, this mental suffering, this inability, this ability to realize that you can't do things, this ability to have an ego which says, I'm the best thing ever, and it's all about me. This is all, comes from that embodiment of source in limitation, and then given it free will. This is the finger rebelling and screaming at you, I'm an individual. And you're like, okay.
Yeah.
I am not an animal.
It's interesting because you think of the how a person chooses.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you were like one of the monks that locked themselves away in a cave or a place somewhere isolated, and they sit there for days, weeks, months, years.
Yeah.
They come to enlightenment, and then they come back to the quote-unquote real world and have to interact with people and all the aggravations that come with dealing with people, and they lose it. There's been many stories of people who have been chasing after enlightenment and having that experience of being isolated and then having to come back to the world, like suddenly your visa is up, you need to go back and renew your visa.
Mm-hmm.
And the experience of being on line after line and always the wrong line for hours on end, and by the time he gets to the desk and they tell him, oh no, you need this before you can come on the line, he just blew up. And you sat there and you're like, well, if you were truly enlightened, you realize that this is the madness of this world. But suddenly now your ego came forth. So how much work do you actually have to do to be able to identify with that larger part of consciousness and not revert back to your ego?
Didn't one of the monks say something similar? He said that your hardest teachers are when you come away from this wonderful solitude and you have to go back and actually interact with people. That's where the training, all the discipline is tested at that point.
How valid is your training?
Right. How valid is your training?
How valid? Well, you remove all people. And it's like, well, I'm not sure about this. But I suppose it's looking at it in terms of like when you're going for a doctor's degree. You have to go into university for a period of time, and when you come out, then the real learning starts.
Right.
Of having to deal with your patients, deal with humanity. How good are you? Or are you going to revert back to teaching or research or cadaver? You know?
I choose cadaver. It's one of the reasons why I did not become a doctor. I thought I loved all the stuff, all the puzzles, all the medicine. The people part was like, ugh. but we're going a little far afield. I love that insight. You know, not just the fact that, you know, if you're training to become enlightened, you go into a state where you deprive the body, you deprive it of association, you deprive it of food, you go into asceticism. You almost put yourself into a state of what other people might consider great suffering. But yet, if you can't come back from it and come back to the world and retain that enlightened state, which says, yes, all the suffering I went through is no more than connection to the all, that all are suffering. All of us are blind. If you come back and say, I've got the tail of the elephant, I know everything about it, and somebody hands you the trunk and you lose it, you have to say, no, we were all blind. I may have gone into this corner and felt the tail of the elephant until I understood it so intimately that I think I've reached enlightenment. But I have to realize that even all that, 10,000 whatevers, supplications and 10 years in the monastery and all that, just the tail of the elephant. You've got a piece, and you've got to go back to someone who has the trunk and say, I understand. You have the trunk. I have the tail. We're both blind. And then now you're on the path. Now you're on the real path.
Now you've made space for actually living an existence where your consciousness can actually observe things. And
egoless.
Yes, egoless, which is very difficult.
Extremely. I mean, that's the key. True enlightenment, all life is suffering, or we're all blind, is that you don't even rail at that. You go, we're all blind. Well, there we are, all blind. You know, we're all afraid. We're all suffering. But you don't sit there and go, I've got to bring the light of everything to everyone. Everyone's got to see. No. Everyone's got to stop suffering. No. Everyone's got to be fed. No. I mean, you can do those things, and you should do those things, but you shouldn't put your ego into them and say, if they don't get done, I'm wrong, they're wrong, we're all wrong. No. We're all blind, all suffering, and it's okay, because that's what life is.
Right. And frankly, that interaction between people, honestly, I think Jesus was the only one who did that. He only did it for 3 years, mind you.
That's all anyone could take.
That's all.
He was only God. 3 years is like way more. 3 years is plenty. Jeez. Come on, guys. I'm sorry. It's funny.
No, but it's the truth. He did the interaction with all human beings, helping and advising. First of all, he was a fully mature adult. Okay. Then he had the 12 apostles, which was probably frustrating as anything.
Can you imagine?
Oh, my.
Oh, my. That's why I think that's why he picked the simplest of men. Because these were people who lived a very all these people that he picked lived very close to the bone. They lived existences of reality. If you didn't fish, you didn't eat. That kind of thing. It wasn't. There weren't the Pharisees who were all in the eyes and the rules and the laws and I'm right and you're wrong. None of that. They were like, okay.
Well, the one that had the education was Greek.
Yeah, Luke.
He was the doctor out of the crew.
Right.
But it was a very, he was like the what's that called? The emergency doctor, instead of being one in research.
ER doctor.
Yeah, he had to deal on every day.
On the front lines, if you will. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the ones who were closest to him were the realist ones, if you will, the ones that didn't have a bunch of ego. But I think that path shows you it's a more insightful thing into what was happening there. It was someone who was bringing a fully realized being into contact with the world, with every part of a very violent, very very non-sanitary world.
Mm-hmm.
And feeding, the lepers, the poor, the blind, talking to all the people who had tons of ego, like the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all those other E's, and yet maintaining, his state. How he became enlightened, we can argue about all we want. The point is that you could easily fall out of that state, but he didn't.
Right, the temptations to indulge in doing the human thing, which is, well, I'm right and you're wrong, because I'm God and you're not.
I mean,
he didn't do that.
Didn't do it. The 40 days in the desert were an asceticism, and then the test at the end, which was recorded very recently, we talked about it a little bit. That the quote-unquote Satan comes and says, here's all the kingdoms of the world, turn this into bread, throw yourself down. These are all temptations to act in the temporal as a ego. I'm so important, I'll throw myself down, someone will save me, no one will let my foot, strike a stone. The whole point is these were temporal temptations.
These were ego temptations.
Ego temptations. Exactly.
That's a good observation, hon. Those were ego temptations.
I got one.
Yeah.
Woo! Hey, yay me! They were ego temptations.
And that, when you sit and think about it, that is the biggest temptation we have down here.
It is.
When you realize that those three temptations are all ego. Human ego.
Mm-hmm.
And he was able to maintain the divine, loving, unconditional love viewpoint and understanding who he is as God.
And in essence, he had gone, what the monks do, into the desert for whatever period of time, some asceticism. He's reached enlightenment. And the very first temptations are ego temptations.
Right. That's something to contemplate. To really, that would be the one I would choose to, how you put little markers in your head when something like that's happening, you're like, an internal visual red flag is waving, going, pay attention here. It's like, is that an ego temptation?
Yeah.
Are you indulging in an ego temptation?
And to the extent that you indulge, it gets easier and easier to succumb to the ego temptation. So
yeah, the more you give in, the easier it is. but it's also the more you're able to stand against it, the easier it becomes.
Yeah, that's totally. As you starve the ego, it becomes easier and easier to become a fully realized being.
Well, to choose otherwise.
To choose otherwise. And let's choose.
Oh, well, we have reached the end of our hour.
No! Yes, we have.
So, I'm Margaret.
And I'm Michael.
And thank you for listening.